Hey everybody, Chaos Maelstrom here, and without the company of Cameron and Ezra, which is a good thing today because that means I will be able to give my full, unadulterated, uninfluenced opinion on Undertale. Now, as some of you guys may have noticed, I kind of didn't really like the way I gave my thoughts at the end of the Undertale project because, well, I was put on the spot and I didn't really have much time to think it over. But I wrote down everything I could to the best of my ability, which is where I am able to express myself at the strongest. So hopefully I will be able to give you guys my true, unadulterated opinion of Undertale right now. Before we begin, I will say there is obviously going to be spoilers in this. So if you do not want to be spoiled on anything in the game, do not watch this. I would just say skip to this part of the review right here if you want to hear my full thoughts on the game without any spoiling whatsoever. So, without any further delays, let's go ahead and begin. When I first got into the game, I already had a good idea of what I'd be getting into, thanks to my friends and the fans spoiling a lot of details for me over time. With a memory like mine, you don't forget certain details that easily. The plot is fairly straightforward. Just find your way home, with just about everything trying to kill you. Along the way, you meet quirky faces and obstacles of varying difficulty. Aside from that, there aren't too many things worth mentioning about the story until you get to the end, where you learn about the past of the Underground and face off against Asgore. It feels like the game should end there, but it doesn't. Then, it feels like the game should end after you put the hurting on Flowey and get an epilogue from your friends. But it doesn't. Then, when you go through Alfie's Lab of Horrors and learn about what exactly happened after Asriel died, and your friends come to stop you from fighting Asgore, it feels like the game should end. But it doesn't! And then, when you finally give the final boss what it needs, get the playable epilogue, and leave the Underground, the game finally ends! Except it doesn't! Oh wait, no it does. Yeah, there were a too many fake outs for me, and I just wanted the game to make up its mind. A lot of the story was predictable, thanks to me already having a good idea of how the game works, and it really doesn't make it better for me in the long run. The game is entirely linear when you decide to play it the way I have, and it really feels like there's nothing much to most of the places you visit. You just go from one room to the next while occasionally finding some amusing flavor text. I would go into more detail, but I don't want to be like the game's fanbase and give a complete synopsis of the entire playthrough and ruin the experience for any future potential players. I understand that the game changes completely when you try a regular or genocide route, but I should want to play the game again to try those out, when in fact, I truly do not. At all. And that brings us to my next topic. Gameplay is the key aspect to me that makes or breaks the game, but it's arguably my least favorite aspect I had to deal with in this game. The gameplay still isn't the worst thing in the world. Perhaps it's because I'm really not a fan of bullet hell type games, but I don't like the battle mechanics of this game. At all. It's unfortunate, since that is more than half of the game right there. It undoubtedly works differently if you're playing a normal or genocide route, but since I played a pacifist route, I always felt very squishy. While I do feel like some of it may be the game's fault, it's probably mostly because I'm just terrible at dodging. Don't even get me started on the Undyne battle. That shield is the absolute worst mechanic in the game. Maybe I need to do some dodge training with Piccolo, but I don't think it'll be that necessary since you'll probably never catch me playing this game again. At least a pacifist run. Aside from being defensive, my actions always felt especially weird, since I never actually got to attack save for the Asgore fight. When it comes to actions in normal fights, you're mainly given three choices. Actions that help you win the battle, actions that hurt your chances of winning, and actions that do nothing. It seems like most of the actions do nothing, but usually you have to do actions in a certain order to win. Essentially, battles in pacifist mode are basically a guess what you have to do to win game, which is a horrendous idea. Mid-boss fights are the same principle, but take a little longer, and boss fights as well take a bit longer, but usually have a twist to them. The game changes up the formula more as it progresses, but at the core of it, all battles are basically bullet hells and will make your experience miserable if you don't enjoy the genre. Aside from that, the game also has some pretty weak and unrewarding exploration whenever you're not struggling through a battle, and a few puzzles along the way, with difficulties that range from various levels, including easy, very easy, non-existently easy, and time-consuming trial and error, while being easy at the core. The puzzles are usually there to make you actually think for a moment, to break up the moments where you're either mindlessly moving forward or mindlessly fighting enemies. It's a little disappointing to me when interactions with characters and puzzles are the highlights of the game. But are the characters themselves the things I enjoy about these interactions? Well, let's take a look. The characters from a story-driven game like Undertale are usually what people remember the most. In order to give them the best potential to make an impact on people, they have to be memorable, have a charming design, be well thought out and three-dimensional, and have a somewhat strong degree of realism so people can empathize with them. Does the game nail all of these? Well, most of the characters have their own way of being memorable, and lots of them have charming designs, especially all of the enemies you fight and the characters you meet. However, I can only say this for sure with the characters you see throughout the length of the game like Sans, Papyrus, Undyne, and Alphys. But what about being well thought out with lots of personality and realism? I can say for a fact that I believe the game does this poorly. Toriel is just a mother. Sans is just a wild card that loves jokes. Papyrus is just a dork who thinks he's the shit and loves spaghetti. Undyne is all about passion and devotion. Mettaton is just a stylish TV star. Aside from that, these characters have nothing else you would be able to find out about them unless you really dig for it or you make assumptions. This also makes them feel less real too. The game tries to make you feel for them in certain situations, but I find it hard to get invested a lot of the time since I can't relate to them that much. Some characters like Asgore are in the game for such little time that you can't understand them enough to feel anything about them. And then there's just throwaway characters like enemies, shopkeepers, and NPCs who have so little to them that they may as well just be replaced by obstacles and blocks of text. It's a shame, as most of these characters have fun and creative designs, only for the game to completely ignore them. There are only a few characters I've really found well developed, like Alphys and Burger Pants. The game forces us to find out a lot about Alphys, and there is a lot to her to be fair, which we can tell from her experiment entries, possessions, and her numerous social media posts. She also does something I feel that almost no other character in the game does, and evolves. She returns to face her problems in the past she tried to leave behind, and she actually ends up following her heart and ending up being a little more intimate with Undyne. I also surprisingly took quite a liking to Burger Pants, as he's probably the most animated face in the game, quite literally. And he's got quite a bit more to him than you would expect, which is something many people don't realize about retail workers. I also like him a lot because he reminds me of a certain friend I have, who I feel sometimes has similar feelings with his job. It's a shame such a good character is hidden away behind viable items and prompted dialogue choices. Who'd have thought a character traced from a napkin drawing would be so well made? And if that's the case, why do other people find all of the characters to be well developed and not just a trait given a body like I do? Well, that is actually an illusion this game does incredibly well. It's a little bit of magic the game specializes in, called dialogue. A game would be very boring to play if the text on the screen felt the same to read as a 600-page college textbook with no pictures. And I'm happy to say this game does not do that. Undertale has some of the most clever and witty bits of text in a game I've seen ever since the item descriptions in Disgaea. If other aspects of the game didn't make me want to be done with it as soon as possible, I would have probably spent 10 minutes in every room checking everything I possibly could to check out the highly amusing flavor text sprinkled throughout the game. I honestly think I would have been fine with the game if the battles were cut out and all the action in the game was instead searching for objects in every room and getting a humorous block of text for every object. This is something that the game does exceptionally well. I found myself laughing at the game's sense of humor just about every episode. True, I'm a person that laughs at just about everything, but I still greatly enjoy reading the text in this game just to see what ridiculous things it ends up saying. But the best part isn't even the text you get from reading the books in the library or checking every individual snowpoff. No. The best text comes from the characters in the game themselves. This saves the issues with the characters from before, as what they lack in their depth and realism, they tremendously make up for in what they have to say. With many characters in this game like Papyrus and Mettaton, you're not trying to look at them in depth because you're more interested in what they're going to end up saying or doing next. While this doesn't make up for their lack of depth and personality, it creates the illusion that they have one. For example, if Papyrus were to give you boring and straightforward descriptions of the items in his house, you would easily be able to notice there's not a whole lot to him as a person. But because of the way his dialogue is written, the goofiness that his entire character is based off of is amplified, making him appear to have more to him than there actually is. The only problem with this process is that sometimes characters end up becoming a little too predictable in what they're going to say. While I don't think you can entirely make a character based off only what they have to say, it is certainly not a bad method, and is good enough for most people. And it's not just humor the game's writing does well. It does a fair job in serious and emotional situations too. I think I noticed this specifically after the Mettaton battle, where you learn you'll have to kill Asgore if you want to leave. The build-up to the battle with the history of the underground and when you speak with Asgore are all well written, though I do feel like it gets a little sappy near the end. Luckily, Flowey comes along and gives us some truly great despicable bits of dialogue. You gotta love how messed up he is. What I'm saying is that the game does humor, serious bits, emotional situations, and just about everything well when it comes to writing. Hell, with the way Toby writes stuff, I feel like Undertale might have been better as a novel in certain cases. But then, of course, we wouldn't have much to look at, which would be a shame, because the game does that pretty well too. As any fan of video games would know, you should never judge a game solely by how it looks, but more by how it feels to play. If you want to judge a game mainly by how it looks, you should be reviewing movies instead. But that doesn't mean graphics aren't important at all. For Undertale in particular, the visual style of the game is mostly the same format as a 16-bit game, which for being done by mostly one person is quite a feat. While not the most eye-catching or fancy appearance for a game of this day and age, it probably appears this way not only for the sake of creating less stress when it comes to making visuals, but also probably for another reason. Toby Fox is clearly enamored by Nintendo's Earthbound franchise. Not difficult to tell because of how much inspiration Undertale draws from the series, and also due to the fact he made Earthbound ROM hacks before this game. The visual style of the game is heavily influenced by Earthbound's colorful, non-traditional RPG appearance. This game is largely influenced by Earthbound, but the likeness I feel is most visible in the game's mood and visuals. I would make more comparisons, but I don't want to turn into MatPat here. The point I'm making is that inspiration from Earthbound is probably the reason the game looks the way it does. This is probably why it strikes such a big accordance with Earthbound fans, which also explains why I'm not the biggest fan of this game considering I've never played Earthbound. But regardless, I do like the way the game looks. I've already complimented the enemy and character designs, but I've not really mentioned the underground itself. Some areas are quite boring and generic game areas, like the ruins at the start of the game and the snowfields that come right after. But after that point, many of the locations become increasingly pleasing to look at, like Waterfall and Hotland. While all of these in-game locations have mostly the same visual feel throughout the area, they become more varied and slightly different with progress, which is a good thing. When it comes to visuals in battle, I have a slightly less positive outlook. All characters here lack the color they are seen with outside of battle, and the background is almost always just boring, blank, and black. But it's not the worst thing in the world. While many enemies are static and barely move, this changes later in the game as characters end up becoming far more animated. It's a nice touch to keep the player interested and the graphics from being too archaic for people to enjoy. I think it's wonderful that we get to see Asgore actually slash at you with his sickle, and Mettaton dancing to his awesome music. And with that said, it's time we talk about my absolute favorite thing from this game. Say anything you want about anything else Undertale has to offer. Say the music is bad, and I will outright say you are wrong. While it doesn't have my favorite video game OST, and the sound font of the game isn't the greatest out there, I will say the music is easily my favorite part of the game. Toby didn't just do a good job with the music. He went above and beyond my expectations for an independent game mostly made by one person. I wouldn't say the entire soundtrack deserves a spot in my iTunes library, but I definitely want to stuff quite a few of them in there. I would go as far to say there is not a single song I dislike in the game. The soundtrack almost feels like it is done on a professional level in many parts, and it really does a good job at making up for the other things the game does wrong. The sound font mostly sticks to old school 8-bit style, done in a way retro games would not have the capability to handle, which is a fairly interesting choice. Of course, that is not all it has to offer, since as you progress, songs get more complex and advanced than what you would expect to see in a retro game. I can't help but notice more similarities to Earthbound in this respect, but that is not in the least bit a bad thing. Specifically, during story-driven battles, you can feel a lot of the mood that you should feel from the battle and the characters you are fighting in the music, which is one of my favorite things to witness when a game gets this right. I think all of the boss fight songs are exceptionally well made, and the best songs in the game. Some of my personal favorite songs are Death by Glamour and Asgore, since both songs expertly portray the atmosphere of the battle and attitudes of the characters. The regular battle theme isn't half bad either, though I wish there were some more variations to it or something since it plays for nearly every battle in the game. The songs outside of battle are rather nice too. They're relaxing and enjoyable for when you're just wandering around and adventuring through an area, and they suit the atmosphere incredibly well depending on where you are. For example, whereas the music that plays in the snowfields is calm and quiet, the music you get in Hotland is upbeat and funky, with both of these tracks and more being a pleasure to listen to throughout the game. The songs that make for when certain events that break up the tranquility are incredibly made too. Whether it's quirky music for the first few times you run into Santa Papyrus and put up with their antics, or menacing music when you're being pursued by a cold-blooded Undyne, the game nails it on the head every single time. The only problem I have with the music isn't actually the music itself, but the gameplay. It's a shame, but since because of how frustrating some of the gameplay is, it actually makes some of the songs a pain to listen to. I know it sounds absurd, but when you struggle with a difficult battle and end up hearing the same song start over and over again, and again, and again, the song is kind of ruined for you and only serves to bring back bad memories every time you hear it. It's unfortunate when bad gameplay has the capability to ruin such good songs. Honestly, if it wasn't for the music, I wouldn't have tried nearly as hard to be positive about things in this game as I have been. And with all that said and done, it's time I give my final standing. When I first played through Undertale, I didn't have nearly as much of a good time as I'm sure many other people have. Looking back on it when editing though, I surprisingly enjoyed it more. Why was my first playthrough so more unpleasant than watching it back? I thought about this for a while, and I've already given my piece on the game, and I don't feel it was that bad. So why do I generally have a negative feeling towards the game? Honestly, I don't feel it properly adds up. So I'm looking at this more psychologically now, and I think I may have pinpointed the main reason I don't like this game as much as others do. I don't enjoy being an accusing person and pointing fingers, but this is something I feel needs to be addressed most of all. What ruined my experience the most? The fandom. I've said this before, but Toby is a big Earthbound fan. And naturally, when you make a game of this quality like Earthbound, Earthbound's fans will flock to it. It's just the kind of game that they wanted, and naturally they want to share it with everyone. But what if you're not really into this style of game and people are violently spreading word of it across the net? You're going to see a lot of it, that's for sure. Considering not everyone on the internet understands the idea that many people enjoy things more when they witness them firsthand, you are going to see spoilers. I myself am the kind of person who, in most situations, remembers things about games well. Almost too well. And when you constantly hang out between two people who have witnessed a full playthrough of the game, naturally, one of them lets a spoiler slip from time to time. It may not be that big of a plot point that is given away, but when you constantly let small plot points and unique things the game does slip, a person like me pieces that information together and figures out the whole thing. And when those same people force you to sit down and play the game that they unintentionally completely spoiled for you over time, you're not going to be super into it. Many people don't realize it, but for every tiny detail about something you share, thousands of people will share another tiny detail. Before you know it, you will come across an entire synopsis of the game on your Facebook feed within a week. Honestly, I feel the only way you can get complete enjoyment from this game is if you know nearly nothing about it. That's why the game was so huge when it first came out, and those people who played that game first liked it the most. The gameplay is basically the only thing you can't share with others over the internet. And when the gameplay of a game is the worst part, you already have all the good things of the game given to you before you play it. At that point, there's hardly any reason to play the game at all. I don't necessarily hate the fandom for this reason, but I definitely don't like it. In fact, I feel sorry for the game. Because of how long it's been out and how much information people have shared about it, I doubt anyone will ever get to feel the magic this game gives to first-time players ever again. Honestly, I want to like this game as much as others do, but I just can't. This is why I feel Undertale would be better if the battle mechanics were changed or removed completely, as I feel the gameplay ruined the fun for me. While it is true though, I don't feel the gameplay ruined the game for me as much as the fans have. So what do I truly feel? I would have liked the game more if I'd have played it by my own intentions. It's a nice game overall, but it works best as a one-hit wonder. Would I recommend it? Unless you've skipped to the end of the video and this is all you're hearing, then no. But in the end, it's just my opinion. Don't let it stop you from doing what you really want to. Overall, I give this game an annoying dog out of 10. Because there's no way I can properly rate this game with my viewpoint.